Before something extraordinary happened, my life was quite ordinary and predictable. I lived in Seattle and worked a job I was truly passionate about. As a supervisor in the juvenile probation department, I helped teenagers who had lost their way. My role wasn't just about monitoring them but guiding them to find the right path. It felt like a calling, and I often said I would do this work for the rest of my life. I truly believed that. But, as life often does, it had unexpected challenges in store for me. On May 5, 2006, I woke up with a sharp pain in my side. It felt familiar. I had experienced kidney problems before and thought it might be another stone. But this time was different. Instead of waiting for the pain to pass as I usually did, I noticed it wasn't going away. Soon, I realized it was time to go to the hospital. When I arrived at the hospital, I remained calm. I knew the routine. They would give me morphine to ease the pain, and either the stone would pass on its own, or they would break it up with a procedure. The doctors decided to keep me overnight for surgery the next morning. Everything seemed to be going according to plan, but no one could have anticipated that a simple kidney stone would lead to something much more serious. That night, lying in the hospital bed, I expected the usual surgery, just like before. But something went wrong. An infection caused by the kidney stone began spreading throughout my body, and my organs started to shut down. My kidneys failed first, and then my heart and lungs began to follow. I remember realizing that I was dying. At some point, I understood, this wasn't just pain, this was the end. But what was surprising was that I didn't feel fear. I was a believer, and my thoughts weren't focused on the terror of death, but on peace. I understood that this was just a transition. I believed that after death, the soul goes to heaven, and at that moment, I simply accepted it. I remember closing my eyes and letting go of my body. My consciousness left my body, and in that instant, an incredible journey began. I felt myself soaring through the hospital floors, then bursting into the sky, piercing the clouds, and moving further into space. Time didn't seem to exist, everything happened in an instant. It reminded me of a verse from the Bible, to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. It all happened so fast that I barely had time to comprehend it. I was already on the threshold of another world. When I entered this new realm, the first thing I saw was something I can only describe as a window. Many people speak of a light at the end of a tunnel, but for me, it was more like a portal or a doorway. It felt like an entrance to an entirely new world where there was no worry, no pain. When I stepped through this window, everything suddenly became completely right. There was nothing that could disturb this perfect peace. I felt as though all my earthly concerns had melted away, and I was filled with an overwhelming sense of harmony. It became clear to me that I no longer belonged to the physical world. This place I had entered didn't adhere to the laws of time and space as I had known them. I felt no heaviness, no physical limitations. For the first time in my life, I truly understood what it meant to be free. Everything around me, from the trees to the glowing objects, seemed to welcome me. I was where I was always meant to be. But despite all the peace and harmony that surrounded me, a strong desire suddenly arose within me. I realized that more than anything in the world, I wanted to see Jesus. I hadn't expected this desire to be so powerful, but it became my one and only goal. I knew that Jesus was somewhere here, and I had to find him. I began moving through a forest that lay before me. The trees, almost as if they were alive, parted as I walked, clearing the way for me. It felt as though they knew where I was headed and were welcoming me on this journey. I didn't just feel like I was walking toward Jesus, it felt like the entire world around me was saying, "He's going to see the King." It was a profound feeling, as though all creation was accompanying me on this path. When I finally reached the clearing, there stood Jesus. He was surrounded by angels and souls of people who had already been redeemed. I couldn't believe my eyes. I walked toward him, and as I got closer, my body naturally fell to its knees. I couldn't do anything else but bow before him. I was so close to him, but I didn't look at his face, only at his feet. And at that moment, I felt love radiating from him. Every part of his body exuded love. Even his feet, his knees, and his hands, all loved me. And when I finally lifted my head, Jesus looked at me with a gaze I will never forget. It was a look of absolute forgiveness. He looked at me as if I had never made a mistake, as if I had always been righteous before him. In that moment, I realized that my entire life had been redeemed by his sacrifice, and I was in heaven only because of what he had done for me. After this incredible moment with Jesus, he told me that my time had not yet come. I needed to return to earth. I didn't want to go back because heaven was such a perfect place. But at the same time, I knew I had to obey. He was my Lord, and I had to follow His will. When I returned to the place where I had entered, I realized that I could move without any limitations. It was more like flying than walking. I wasn't just walking back through the forest, I was soaring above it, feeling a sense of complete freedom. I could be wherever I wanted, simply by thinking it. And as I approached the boundary of this world, I understood that my body on earth wasn't ready to receive me yet. But that didn't scare me. I was glad to stay here a little longer. At some point during my time in heaven, I suddenly saw my family. The first person I noticed was my grandmother Mary. She stood in front, and behind her were entire generations of my ancestors. They all looked at me with smiles I had never seen on earth. They radiated joy, and it was an incredible feeling to see all my loved ones so happy. I realized that family in heaven was something more than just relationships on earth. Here, family was united by eternal love and peace. All the conflicts and misunderstandings that might have existed between us on earth had disappeared. There was pure joy and unity. And I understood how important family is, not just on earth, but in eternity. After meeting my family, Jesus again told me that my time hadn't come yet. I had to return to earth. But before I left, my grandmother gave me an important message. She said, "Bring as many of us back with you as you can." This meant that I had to return and help as many people as possible find faith so they could come to heaven too. I felt that this message wasn't just for me, it was my new mission on earth. When I returned to my body, I felt a sharp contrast between the heavenly harmony and the physical world. My body was weak, and the doctors at the hospital were already preparing to sign my death certificate. But as soon as I re-entered my body, the machines I was connected to came back to life. The doctors were shocked but quickly acted to save me. I was very weak, but I knew I had been given a second chance. After this experience, my life changed completely. I no longer feared death. Now I knew that death wasn't the end, but merely a transition to something far greater and more beautiful. But I also realized that my time on earth wasn't over yet. I had a mission, to help others find faith and understand what awaits them after this life. Now I live with a sense of gratitude for every moment. I no longer take life for granted. I try to use every opportunity to share God's love with others. After all, every choice we make has eternal significance, and I want as many people as possible to come to understand this truth. My experience changed everything. I realized that God's love is limitless, and heaven isn't just a place, it's a state of eternal peace, harmony, and love. Our actions on earth matter, and how we live here prepares us for eternity. The most important thing I want people to know is that you don't have to be perfect. All you need to do is accept God's love and forgiveness to be ready for that meeting with Him. My life was filled with tasks and routine. I would wake up early, rush to work, handle business matters, and build my career. Every day felt the same, and I was used to living on a tight schedule, leaving no time for deep thoughts about the eternal. I was entirely focused on success, measured in money and status. Work, plans, meetings, this was my everyday reality. The day that changed everything showed no signs of what was to come. I went to work as usual and got absorbed in my tasks. Lunch with colleagues seemed ordinary, but suddenly, I felt a sharp pain in my chest. It was so intense that I barely managed to pull away from the table. My colleagues immediately noticed something was wrong and rushed to help me. But soon, everything around me started to blur, and I felt myself losing consciousness. The last thing I heard were voices calling for help before my awareness faded into darkness. When I woke up, I realized I was no longer in my body. I was floating above it, looking down at myself lying on the restaurant floor. People were rushing around, and someone was calling an ambulance. I watched this unfold as if I were a distant spectator, without fear or panic. Everything seemed surreal, like I was watching a movie in which my body played the leading role, but I was not part of it. Suddenly, I felt an invisible force lifting me upward. I was being carried higher and higher at an incredible speed. I saw the space around me change. I flew through the sky, past the stars, and eventually found myself in a vast, empty void. I felt no fear, only an incredible sense of peace, as if I was meant to be there, heading towards some destined place. Out of nowhere, a bright light appeared in front of me. This light was not just a visible object, it radiated warmth and tranquility. It surrounded me, filling me with a sense of calm that I had never experienced before. I could sense that this light was alive, conscious. Around the light, glowing figures began to appear, radiating the same brightness and love. I didn't know who these beings were, but they welcomed me. We didn't speak, but I could understand them without words. All communication was happening on a level of pure feelings and thoughts. I was overwhelmed with peace, as if I had finally come home after a long, difficult journey. I felt that I was here for a reason, and I had been expected. The light around me gradually revealed an incredible scene. I found myself in a world that is impossible to describe with words. It was a place beyond time and limitations. Everything around me radiated harmony and beauty. I saw trees that glowed with a gentle light, and the sky was deeper and more vibrant than anything I had ever seen on earth. The colors were bright yet soft, soothing and calming. I saw other beings, souls inhabiting this place. They weren't like ordinary people, they glowed with light, just like everything else around me. Their faces radiated joy. They didn't speak to me, but their presence was filled with kindness and love. I felt as though I knew them, even though I didn't recognize them from my life. There was a sense of unity and understanding that can't be captured in words. Suddenly, one of the glowing figures approached me and conveyed a message: "Your time has not come yet. You must return." This message wasn't spoken aloud, but I understood it deeply, on an emotional level. I didn't understand why I had to go back, I felt so at peace in this place. But the being continued to send me an important message. I had a mission I hadn't completed yet. I felt there was something important for me to do, but I didn't know what it was. This realization began to stir anxiety in me. I knew I had to return to the physical world, but I wasn't the same person anymore. What I had learned in this place had changed me forever. The light around me began to slowly fade, and I felt myself being pulled back to my body. I started to feel the heaviness I hadn't experienced in this realm. Suddenly, I was back in my body, lying in a hospital bed. Doctors were working around me, connecting me to machines and checking my vitals. I opened my eyes and realized I had returned. My chest still ached, and my body was weak, but inside I felt a new strength and understanding, knowing I had been given a second chance. It took a few hours before I could fully grasp what had happened. I remembered the light, the beings, and their messages. It all felt so real that I couldn't simply forget it and return to my old life. After I came back to life, everything changed. My previous goals and ambitions now seemed small and insignificant. I no longer chased success or material possessions. I felt that I now had a higher purpose, to understand what I was meant to do and fulfill my mission. I began to reflect on life, on how each day could be lived with the awareness that we are preparing for something greater. My life on earth was merely a preparation for eternity. I started seeking answers, studying spiritual practices, and helping those around me. I realized that every action we take matters. Now, I live with gratitude for each moment, and I no longer fear death. I know it's not the end but merely a transition to something far more beautiful. My purpose is to share this knowledge with others and help them understand that life is just the beginning of a journey towards something eternal and grand.